The final words Chloe Thorne spoke to him as her fiancé hung in the air of the ridiculously expensive restaurant, a space she had chosen to impress upon him the chasm between their worlds. You have until the engagement party, Elias. Either you quit that embarrassing little job, or we are finished. She slid the diamond ring, a piece of jewelry whose cost could have funded his supposed little job for a year, across the polished mahogany table. It spun once, a miniature galaxy of cold fire before settling between them, a promise and an ultimatum. Elias Kalen looked at the ring, then at the woman he had thought he loved. He saw not concern for their future, but a frantic, desperate need to curate an image. His job as a design consultant for a small, obscure firm called Ethelred Structures was a stain on the perfect portrait she was painting of their life. What she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly comprehend in her world of polished surfaces and inherited status, was that Ethelred Structures wasn't just his job. It was his creation. And the patent her company, Vanguard Designs, was currently bleeding money trying to acquire, the one that would define the next generation of sustainable architecture, was his. Within 3 weeks, at that very engagement party, she would not be celebrating her social ascension. She would be witnessing the complete and utter demolition of the world she held so dear, and he would be the one holding the architect's plans. Before we witness the spectacular collapse of that carefully constructed facade, I want to welcome you to our channel. We're so glad you're here. If you enjoy stories where patience and integrity triumph over pride and arrogance, you're in the right place. Go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss the powerful conclusion to stories like this one. And just for fun, let us know in the comments where you're watching from today. It's always amazing to see how far these stories travel. Now, let's return to the beginning of the end for Chloe Thorne. Their story had begun, ironically, with a discussion about architecture. They met at a gallery opening, a world Chloe navigated with the effortless grace of a predator in her home territory. Elias, by contrast, stood near a structural column, observing. He was there not for the art on the walls, but for the art of the building itself, a renovated warehouse with exposed steel trusses and clever light wells. Chloe had approached him, mistaking his quiet contemplation for social awkwardness. "A bit overwhelming, isn't it?" she'd said, her voice smooth and confident. He'd smiled. "Not at all. I was just admiring the cantilever on the mezzanine level. It's a brave choice." Her perfectly sculpted eyebrows lifted in surprise. She was a senior project manager at Vanguard Designs, one of the city's top architectural firms. She expected him to be intimidated by her, not to be dissecting the engineering of their surroundings. That initial conversation, grounded in a shared passion, was genuine. He was captivated by her sharp mind, her ambition. She was intrigued by his quiet depth, a stark contrast to the preening, boastful men in her circle. He told her he was a design consultant. It was the truth in its most humble form. He consulted on designs, his own. He didn't mention that he had left a lucrative position at a rival megafirm 2 years prior to found Ethelred Structures, a boutique entity focused on radical innovation in material science and structural engineering. He had wanted something more than the endless cycle of glass and steel monoliths. He wanted to build the future. He had also wanted, upon meeting Chloe, to be valued for who he was, not for what his success could offer her. So he kept his status quiet, a private test of character. He presented himself as a man of modest means but deep passion, working for a small niche company. He wanted to see if that would be enough. For a while, it seemed to be. She called his work quaint and idealistic, but with a tone of fond indulgence. It was his little hobby, a charming eccentricity. But as their relationship deepened and marriage became the topic of conversation, her indulgence began to curdle into embarrassment, and then into outright disdain. The test he had set was beginning to yield its results, and they were more disappointing than he could have ever imagined. The quaint consultant from the little firm was becoming a liability to the brand she was building, the brand of Chloe Thorne. The first major crack in the facade appeared during a dinner at her parents' estate. The Thorne family home wasn't a house. It was a declaration of dominance, a sprawling neo-Georgian mansion that seemed to command the very land it sat upon. Marble floors gleamed under the light of a crystal chandelier, the size of a small car. Elias, in his well-made but unbranded suit, felt less like a guest and more like an exhibit. Chloe's father, Marcus Thorne, the CEO of Vanguard Designs, presided over the dinner table like a king holding court. He had a way of asking questions that weren't questions at all, but rather traps designed to establish his superiority. "So, Elias," he began, swirling a deep red wine in his glass, "Chloe tells us you work for, what is it again? Ethelred?" He pronounced the name as if it were a vaguely unpleasant substance he'd found on his shoe. "Ethelred Structures," Elias replied calmly, meeting the older man's gaze. He refused to be baited. Marcus chuckled, a dry, rustling sound. "Right. Structures, quaint. And what is it you structure over there? Garden sheds? Custom bookshelves?" The question hung in the air, thick with condescension. Chloe's mother, a woman who seemed to be composed entirely of pearls and nervous tension, offered a brittle smile. Chloe's younger brother, Julian, a smirking echo of his father, snorted into his napkin. Elias felt Chloe's hand tense on his arm under the table, but she said nothing. She didn't defend him. She didn't correct her father's arrogant tone. She just sat there, her expression a mask of strained pleasantry, radiating embarrassment. He was her problem to be managed, not her partner to be defended. "We specialize in material science applications for sustainable building," Elias said, his voice even. "We develop new ways to make buildings more efficient and harmonious with their environment." Marcus waved a dismissive hand. "Ah, the green angle, very fashionable, very unprofitable, I imagine. At Vanguard, we focus on things that last. Legacy, concrete, steel, and quarterly profits." He gave a self-satisfied smile, as if he had just delivered a devastating intellectual blow. "The future is legacy, my boy. Remember that." Elias thought of the patents filed under his name, the quiet work that was poised to redefine what legacy even meant. He thought of the complex algorithms he'd developed for thermal regulating composites, technologies that would make buildings like this one seem like wasteful prehistoric relics. He felt a profound sense of distance from these people, a disconnect so vast it was almost dizzying. Later in the evening, as Marcus held forth on a recent acquisition, Elias took out a small leather-bound journal and a fountain pen from his jacket pocket. It was a habit he'd had for years. He wasn't taking notes, he was sketching. A cross-section of a self-supporting arch, a detail of a new type of joint. It was how he thought, how he processed the world. Julian, emboldened by wine and his father's approval, leaned over. "What's that, Elias? Doodling? Writing a poem about the injustice of it all?" he sneered. Elias didn't look up from his page. "I'm working," he said softly. The simple statement, delivered without a trace of anger, seemed to momentarily wrong-foot the younger man. But Chloe saw the journal and flinched as if he'd produced a dead rat. As soon as they were alone in the grand hallway, her composure shattered. "Could you not do that?" she hissed, her eyes flashing. "Do what?" "That, the little book, the pen. You look like a waiter taking an order. My father is trying to engage with you, and you're off in your own little world, doodling. It's embarrassing, Elias." He looked at her, truly looked at her. Her face was tight with frustration. "He wasn't engaging with me, Chloe. He was belittling me, and you let him." Her mouth opened, then closed. She couldn't deny it, so she deflected. "You're just being sensitive. That's just how my father is. You have to learn to play the game. You can't show up to a place like this and act like you're in some bohemian cafe. This is the real world." He slowly closed his journal, the smooth leather warm against his fingers. This simple object, a repository of his most brilliant and valuable ideas, was, in her eyes, a mark of shame. "The real world," he repeated quietly. He was beginning to understand that his and Chloe's definitions of that phrase were irreconcilably different. The pressure began to mount in the weeks that followed. Chloe's professional life had become consumed by a single, all-important objective, the Helios Project. It was Vanguard Design's bid for a massive city-defining cultural center, a project that would cement the firm's, and by extension, her father's legacy. But the project was stalled, dead in the water. The client, a forward-thinking philanthropic trust, had issued a non-negotiable mandate. The building had to be a net-zero marvel of sustainability, a living structure that responded to its environment. Vanguard's top engineers had hit a wall. Their conventional methods were too clunky, too inefficient. They needed a breakthrough. Specifically, they needed a new composite material that could regulate temperature passively, absorbing heat during the day and releasing it at night with near-perfect efficiency. The technology existed. It was protected by a series of interlocking patents so airtight they were legendary in the industry, and they were all held by one small, infuriatingly stubborn firm, Ethelred Structures. From Elias's perspective, the dramatic irony was almost painful to watch. Chloe would come home from work, her body rigid with stress, and vent her frustrations to him over dinner. "It's impossible, Eli," she'd say, pacing their modern, minimalist apartment, an apartment he paid for, a fact she conveniently ignored. "We're trying to acquire this patent from some tiny backwater company, and they won't even take a meeting. They just reject every offer our lawyers send. My father is furious. He thinks the owner is some eccentric old hermit who hates big corporations." Elias would nod, sipping his water, offering quiet, noncommittal sympathies. "That sounds difficult," he would say. The understatement of the century. He knew every offer they'd made. He had personally drafted the rejection letters. The offers were laughably low, arrogant attempts to bully a smaller entity into submission. They weren't trying to partner, they were trying to conquer. The man is probably some failed architect living in his mother's basement, clinging to his one good idea, she fumed one night, throwing her briefcase onto a chair. He has no idea what he's sitting on. We're offering him life-changing money, and he just sends back these polite, condescending little notes. Who does he think he is? Elias felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. He looked at the woman he was supposed to marry, a woman who spoke of another professional, unaware it was him, with such dismissive, venomous contempt. This was her true nature, stripped of the charm she deployed in public. This was how she saw anyone she perceived as being beneath her. Her stress over the Helios project became the primary justification for her campaign against his career. "Don't you see?" she argued, her voice rising with exasperation. "I'm trying to build something here, a life for us. I'm under incredible pressure, and I come home, and you're sketching in your little book. I need a partner, Elias, not a hobbyist. If you quit that dead-end job, you could support me. You could manage our lives, be there for me. You could finally be part of my world." The audacity of it was breathtaking. He was already supporting them. The apartment, the car she drove, the vacations she boasted about to her friends, all were funded by the embarrassing little firm she so despised. He had funneled his earnings through a private wealth management account, maintaining the illusion of a modest salary. He wanted her love, not her avarice. But now he saw he was getting neither. He was simply an accessory that no longer matched her outfit. The final ultimatum, delivered over the polished table with the diamond ring as a hostage, was not a surprise. It was an inevitability. It was the final, formal declaration that his authentic self was not welcome in her world. The planning for the engagement party became Chloe's magnum opus of social signaling. It was to be held not in a rented hall, but in the sprawling, manicured gardens of the Thorne estate itself. It was less a celebration of love and more a strategic merger, a chance for Chloe to formally present Elias to her world, but only an acceptable, sanitized version of him. Every detail was a battleground. Elias suggested a string quartet that played modern compositions. Chloe insisted on a 10-piece band that played bland, predictable society standards. He proposed a caterer known for innovative farm-to-table cuisine. She booked the most expensive, most traditional, and most ostentatious caterer in the city. "It's about sending the right message, Eli," she explained, as if speaking to a child. "It's about showing people we have taste, that we belong." Her use of "we" was particularly galling. What she meant was that he had to prove he belonged with her. He was the project to be renovated, the flawed element to be brought up to code. He watched her operate with a kind of detached anthropological curiosity. She wasn't just planning a party, she was constructing a narrative, and in her story he was a character with no backstory, no agency of his own. He was simply Prince Charming's handsome but penniless friend, lucky to have been invited to the ball. The week before the party, she delivered the final, most devastating blow. It came not in a moment of anger, but in a quiet, calculated conversation while they were getting ready for a charity gala. She was fastening a string of pearls around her neck, her reflection cool and appraising in the mirror. "Elias, we need to talk about what you're going to say at the party," she began. "When people ask what you do." He paused in the middle of tying his tie. "I'll tell them I'm a design consultant for Ethelred Structures." She turned from the mirror, her expression one of profound weariness, as if his very existence was a burden she was struggling to bear. "No, you won't," she said flatly. "You can't. I've already told a few of my closest friends that you're in between roles, that you're exploring your options after leaving your old firm." The lie was so seamless, so audacious, it almost took his breath away. She had erased his work, his passion, his entire professional identity, with a few casual, well-placed sentences. "You told them I'm unemployed?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "I told them you're transitioning," she corrected, as if the euphemism made it any less of an insult. "It sounds better. It makes you look ambitious, not like you're stuck in some obscure little company. Then, after the party, you'll officially quit, and we can announce you're joining Vanguard in a consulting capacity. My father has already agreed to create a position for you." He saw the entire plan laid bare. He wasn't just being asked to quit his job. He was being asked to perform a public act of self-annihilation, to stand in a garden full of her peers, and silently endorse the fiction she had created for him. He was to become a project of hers, a man she had saved from obscurity. It was the ultimate act of possession. He finished tying his tie, his movements precise and economical, and he looked at his reflection in the mirror, past her, and saw a stranger looking back. Or rather, he saw the man she wanted him to be. A handsome, empty vessel, a decorative object with no inner life. The quiet before the storm had arrived. This was the moment, the point of no return. He turned to face her, his expression unreadable. There was no anger, no pleading, just a profound, chilling calm. "I understand," he said. The two words were a concession, an agreement. She visibly relaxed, a triumphant little smile playing on her lips. She had won. She had finally broken him. She patted his chest. "Good. I knew you'd see it my way. It's for the best, Eli. For us." She thought he was agreeing to her terms. She had no idea that he was simply agreeing that he finally, completely, understood the truth of their relationship, and he was agreeing, in the silent chambers of his own heart, to end it. The demolition was scheduled. The permits were all in order. The setting for the revelation was not the garden party. That would have been too theatrical, too personal. Elias was a man of precision, of structure. The confrontation needed to happen in the arena where the stakes were highest, where the arrogance of the Thorne family was most concentrated, the boardroom of Vanguard Designs. 3 days before the party, Marcus Thorne called an emergency meeting of the executive board. The Helios project was on the verge of collapse. The clients had issued a final deadline: secure the necessary technology within the week, or they would award the contract to a rival firm in Zurich. The mood in the 40th floor boardroom was funereal. The long, polished table reflected the grim faces of the 6 board members. At the head of the table, Marcus Thorne looked apoplectic, his face a mask of crimson frustration. Chloe sat at his right hand, her expression tight with anxiety. Her own reputation was inextricably linked to this project. "It's inexplicable," Marcus boomed, his voice echoing in the silent room. "We've made 5 separate offers to this Ethelred Structures. The last one was for $10 million. $10 million, and the response? A 1-sentence email. Thank you for your revised offer. Respectfully, we decline. Who does this person think he is?" Arthur Sterling, a silver-haired board member with a reputation for calm reason and sharp intellect, cleared his throat. "Perhaps the issue isn't the amount, Marcus. Perhaps it's the approach. Our offers have been aggressive. They have not invited collaboration. They have demanded capitulation. This Ethelred is a leader in its field, however small. Its patents are revolutionary. The owner may value respect more than a buyout, Marcus scoffed. Respect? We're vanguard designs. We are the pinnacle of this industry. Respect is owed to us, not the other way around. This is some upstart who got lucky, and he's trying to hold us hostage. Chloe chimed in, her voice betraying her desperation. Arthur is right, Dad. Our strategy isn't working. We need to open a dialogue. But they won't even tell us who the principal is. It's all shielded behind layers of corporate law. As she spoke, Marcus's personal assistant discreetly entered the room and whispered something in his ear. Marcus waved her away impatiently. Not now. Sir, the assistant insisted, her voice barely a whisper. There's a Mr. Elias Kalin here to see you. He says it's urgent and that it's regarding the Ethelred patent. Chloe's head snapped up. Elias? Here? A cold dread, sharp and unfamiliar, pierced through her anxiety. What on earth is he doing here? She muttered, a flush of anger and embarrassment creeping up her neck. He was supposed to be at home, drafting his resignation letter. Marcus looked baffled. Kalin? Your fiancé? What the hell does he know about this? Tell him to wait. He said the board would want to hear what he has to say, the assistant added nervously. Chloe felt a surge of fury. How dare he? How dare he show up here, at the most critical meeting of her career, to do what? Plead for a job? Interrupt their business? Let him in, she snapped, her voice like ice. I'll handle this. She would get him out of the room in under a minute. She would deal with his insubordination later, and the consequences would be severe. Arthur Sterling looked on, his expression one of quiet curiosity. The name was familiar, but he couldn't quite place it. A few moments later, the heavy oak door of the boardroom swung open. Elias Kalin walked in. He wasn't wearing the casual clothes of a man in between roles. He was dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, a crisp white shirt, and a simple, elegant tie. He carried a slim, expensive-looking leather portfolio. He radiated an aura of calm, unshakable authority that was so alien to Chloe's perception of him that for a moment he seemed like a complete stranger. Elias walked into the boardroom, and the atmosphere shifted. The air, thick with desperation and blame, suddenly became still, charged with a new, uncertain energy. He didn't look at Chloe. His eyes swept across the faces of the board members, calm and assessing, before finally landing on Marcus Thorne. Chloe stood up, her chair scraping harshly against the floor. Elias, what is the meaning of this? This is a private executive meeting. You need to leave. Now. Her voice was a low, furious command meant to put him in his place, to remind him of the vast gulf between his world and hers. He ignored her completely, as if she were a piece of furniture. He walked to the empty chair at the far end of the table, directly opposite Marcus, and placed his leather portfolio down in front of him. He remained standing. Mr. Thorne, members of the board, he began, his voice clear and steady, filling the room with an unexpected resonance. My name is Elias Kalin. I apologize for the intrusion, but I was told you were discussing the Helios project and your difficulties in acquiring the necessary patents from Ethelred structures. Marcus Thorne stared at him, his face a mixture of confusion and incandescent rage. What we discuss in this room is none of your damn business, son. You have 60 seconds to explain yourself before I have security escort you out. Elias gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. That won't be necessary. He paused, letting the silence stretch, drawing the focus of every person in the room. He had them. He then delivered the quiet bomb, a statement of simple, devastating fact that would shatter their reality. I am here because your approach has been inefficient. You have been sending aggressive, lowball offers to my legal team for 6 months. You have been attempting to bully a company you clearly do not understand. So, I decided to come here myself to clear up any confusion. He looked from Marcus to Chloe, whose face had gone pale. The dread in her chest was blooming into full-blown horror. The pieces were clicking into place in a way she could not comprehend and did not want to accept. Elias reached down, opened his portfolio, and took out a single familiar object, his worn leather journal. He placed it gently on the polished surface of the table. This eccentric old hermit you've been chasing, he said, his voice dropping slightly. This failed architect in his mother's basement is me. Silence. A profound, absolute silence that was heavier than any shout. The board members stared, unblinking. Marcus Thorne's mouth was slightly agape, the blustering anger frozen on his face. Chloe felt the floor drop out from beneath her. It was a physical sensation, a lurch in her gut, as if she were in a falling elevator. Her mind refused to process the information. It was impossible. A joke. A cruel, elaborate prank. But the look on Elias's face was not one of a man telling a joke. It was the look of an executioner. I am the founder, owner, and chief designer of Ethelred Structures, Elias stated, his voice devoid of triumph, filled only with a calm finality. I hold the patents you require. All of them. He opened the journal. Inside, the pages were filled with elegant, intricate drawings, complex formulas, and handwritten notes. He turned it around for the board to see. The original conceptual sketches for the tri-helical thermal composite, developed 2 years ago. Arthur Sterling leaned forward, his eyes wide with dawning comprehension and awe. He recognized the genius on the page instantly. Elias then looked directly at Chloe. The coldness in his eyes was something she had never seen before. It was the look one gives to a stranger, a miscalculation, a problem that has been solved and is now being discarded. You demanded I quit my embarrassing job, he said, his voice soft, but carrying to every corner of the room. This is that job. The immediate aftermath was a tableau of shock. Marcus Thorne, a man who commanded industries, was speechless. His face cycled through a series of emotions, disbelief, fury, and then a dawning, horrified understanding of the magnitude of his miscalculation. Chloe felt as if all the air had been sucked out of the room. Her legs felt weak, and she sank back into her chair. Her mind was a maelstrom of denial and humiliation. This couldn't be real. The man she had mocked, the man she had tried to mold and erase, was the very person holding the key to her company's future, her father's legacy, and her own career. He was not the project to be fixed. He was the architect of her ruin. Arthur Sterling was the first to speak, his voice filled with a quiet respect. Mr. Kalin, he said, ignoring the stunned Thorns entirely. It is an honor. I followed the work of Ethelred for the past year. It's revolutionary. I must confess, I'm stunned. Elias inclined his head slightly. Thank you, Mr. Sterling. I respect your work as well. This exchange of professional courtesy, happening over her head as if she wasn't even there, was another sharp jab of humiliation for Chloe. Marcus finally found his voice sputtering as he tried to pivot from arrogance to desperate conciliation. Elias, son, well, this is quite the surprise. A misunderstanding clearly, a colossal misunderstanding. He laughed, a booming false sound that echoed unnaturally in the tense room. You should have just told us. We could have avoided all this unpleasantness. Elias turned his cool gaze on his almost father-in-law. Told you? With all due respect, sir, your entire culture is built on the idea that a person's worth is displayed, not discovered. If I had told you who I was, you would have seen value in my assets, not in me. I have spent the last year confirming that suspicion. He then began his list of grievances, not as an emotional outburst, but as a calm, factual accounting. You dismissed my work as quaint. You openly mocked my profession at your dinner table. You treated me not as a future member of your family, but as a social liability to be managed. He then turned his eyes back to Chloe, and the temperature in the room dropped another 10 degrees. And you, he said, his voice cutting through her haze of shock, you were so ashamed of me, so terrified that my embarrassing little job would tarnish your image, that you demanded I erase myself. You lied to your friends. You demanded I perform a charade at our engagement party. You wanted a prop, Chloe, not a partner. Chloe finally broke. Tears welled in her eyes, tears of shame, of fury, of self-pity. Elias, please, she whispered, her voice cracking. We can fix this. I love you. I was wrong. I was so wrong. He looked at her, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of something other than coldness in his eyes. It was not love, it was pity, and it was far worse. Love doesn't ask someone to become smaller so you can feel bigger, he said softly. That's not love, it's consumption. He then turned his attention back to the board, all business once more. Now, regarding the Helios project, Ethelred Structures is prepared to enter into a licensing agreement and joint venture with Vanguard Designs. A collective sigh of relief went through the board members. However, Elias continued, my terms are not negotiable. First, the project will be under my direct architectural oversight. Second, the partnership will be with Vanguard Designs, the corporation, not with the Thorne family. My contract will stipulate a mandatory leadership review and a restructuring of the executive committee to be overseen by an independent third party. He looked directly at Arthur Sterling. Someone like you, Mr. Sterling, would be an acceptable choice to lead that review. The implication was clear. He was demanding Marcus's head on a platter, and he was cutting Chloe out of the equation entirely. He was saving their company while simultaneously dismantling their dynasty. In the days that followed the boardroom detonation, the fallout was swift and brutal. News of what had happened spread through the corridors of Vanguard Designs like a contagion. The story was too dramatic, too perfectly ironic to be contained. The tale of the arrogant CEO and his social climbing daughter, who had belittled her own fiancé, only to discover he was the reclusive genius they had been trying to crush, became the stuff of corporate legend. Chloe became a pariah overnight. The colleagues who had once vied for her approval now avoided her gaze in the hallways. The whispers followed her everywhere. She could feel the mixture of pity and schadenfreude from her subordinates. They knew. Everyone knew she had been engaged to Elias Kalin, the man now hailed as the savior of the Helios Project, and that she had considered him and his work to be beneath her. Her authority was gone, evaporated in the heat of her own spectacular humiliation. Marcus Thorne fought, of course. He blustered and threatened, calling on old loyalties, but the ground had shifted beneath his feet. Arthur Sterling, backed by a majority of the board and the undeniable leverage of Elias's terms, moved decisively. The choice was simple: accept the terms and save the company, or refuse and face total collapse and shareholder lawsuits. Marcus's reign was over. He was pushed into a forced early retirement, a gilded cage to mask the brutal reality of his ousting. Chloe was left adrift in the wreckage. Her father, her protector and enabler, was gone. Her career, once a glittering trajectory, was now a smoking crater. She was allowed to keep a position at Vanguard, a demotion to a back-office role in archival management. It was a mercy offered by Arthur Sterling, but it felt like a life sentence. She was no longer a senior project manager, no longer client-facing. She was a ghost haunting the halls of her former kingdom. A few days after the board meeting, desperate and broken, she went to find Elias. She found the address for Ethelred Structures, not a basement, but a stunningly minimalist, award-winning building in the city's design district, a building Elias had designed himself. She waited for him in the lobby, a space of serene light and natural materials that felt a universe away from the cold marble of her family's mansion. When he emerged from a meeting, he wasn't surprised to see her. He stopped a respectful distance away, his expression patient but unyielding. "Chloe," he said, his voice neutral. "I'm sorry," she began, the words tumbling out in a raw, desperate rush. "Elias, I'm so sorry. I was a fool. I was blind and arrogant and awful. But I do love you. Please give me another chance. We can start over." He listened without interruption, his hands in his pockets. When she finally fell silent, her shoulders shaking with sobs, he spoke, and his words were not cruel, but they were devastatingly final. He used the language they once shared, the language of architecture, to explain the ruin. "A relationship is a structure, Chloe," he said, his voice gentle. "It needs a solid foundation. The foundation is trust, respect, and mutual acceptance. We never had that. From the beginning, you saw flaws in my foundation. You didn't want to reinforce it. You wanted to demolish it and build something else in its place, something that matched your own aesthetic." He gestured around at the beautiful, honest space of his office. "This is me. This work, this way of thinking. This is my foundation. And you called it embarrassing. You asked me to hide it, to tear it down. The damage isn't from one moment, one explosion. It's from 1,000 tiny acts of corrosion. The structure is fundamentally unsound. It cannot be repaired. It can only be cleared away to make room for something new." She looked at him, her heart breaking, because she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that he was right. The demolition was complete. Months passed, the city changed, as cities do. The steel skeleton of the Helios Cultural Center began to rise against the skyline, a testament to a new way of building, a new way of thinking. It was a stunning, organic structure that seemed to grow from the earth itself, and it was the talk of the architectural world. Elias Kalin was no longer a reclusive genius. He was a celebrated visionary. His firm, Ethelred Structures had entered into a formidable partnership with the newly restructured Vanguard Designs, now led by CEO Arthur Sterling. The collaboration was proving to be immensely successful, pushing the boundaries of what was thought possible in urban design. Elias was at the helm, not with arrogance, but with a quiet, focused intensity that inspired loyalty and creativity in everyone who worked with him. He was the same man he had always been, only the world's perception of him had changed. Chloe, meanwhile, was living in the quiet aftermath. She had sold her expensive apartment and moved into a smaller, more modest place. She went to work every day at Vanguard, to her small office in the archives, surrounded by the blueprints of past glories. The demotion, which had at first felt like a prison sentence, had become a strange sort of monastery. Stripped of her ambition and her need to perform, she was forced to confront the person she had been. She saw her arrogance, her obsession with status, her casual cruelty, with a clarity that was painful but purifying. She learned humility in the quiet, dusty rows of architectural history. She saw the plans for the old, bombastic buildings her father had championed and compared them to the elegant, efficient, and beautiful designs Elias was creating for the Helios project. She finally understood the difference between building for ego and building for humanity. One day, she passed Elias in the main atrium of the Vanguard building. He was in a deep conversation with Arthur Sterling and a group of young, eager architects who hung on his every word. He was smiling, his face animated with passion. He looked up, and their eyes met across the crowded space. There was no animosity in his gaze, no triumph. There was just a quiet, neutral acknowledgement, a flicker of recognition for a past that felt like it belonged to another lifetime. In that moment, Chloe felt no bitterness, no self-pity. She just felt a profound sense of loss for the man she had never truly known and the future she had carelessly thrown away. That evening, she went back to her small office, logged into her computer, and sent him a simple, one-line email. It contained no excuses, no pleas, no drama. It just said, "Thank you for the lesson. I'm sorry." It was the most honest thing she had ever written. Elias sat in his office, the late afternoon sun streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. On his screen was the email from Chloe, one sentence. He read it several times. It was the first communication she had sent that wasn't a demand, a plea, or a justification. It was simply an admission. He felt no surge of victory, no lingering anger. The storm had passed long ago, leaving behind a clean, quiet calm. He had gotten his justice, not through revenge, but by simply refusing to compromise his own integrity. He had held up a mirror, and the reflection had done the rest. His desire had never been to destroy Chloe, but to be seen for who he was. Her inability to do so had been her tragedy, not his. He understood now that her obsession with status was a kind of prison, a cage built of the fear of being judged as ordinary. He had been free all along, in his quiet work, in his passion. He had just been waiting for the right person to share that freedom with. Chloe had not been that person. He thought about the journey, the painful dinners, the condescending remarks, the final, humiliating ultimatum. They were like marks on an old blueprint, notations of a structure that was poorly conceived and ultimately demolished. The new structure of his life was sound, built on a foundation of authenticity and quiet confidence. His success hadn't corrupted him. It had only affirmed the principles he had always held. True worth was not something that could be displayed like a trophy or inherited like an estate. It was forged in the quiet hours, in the dedication to one's craft, in the integrity of one's character. It was about the quality of the work, not the volume of the applause. He minimized the email, a quiet acknowledgement of a chapter closed. He picked up his leather journal, the object she had once found so embarrassing. It was filled with his past, his present, and his future. He turned to a fresh page and began to sketch. It wasn't a skyscraper or a corporate headquarters. It was a small, elegant design for a pro bono community library in a low-income neighborhood. The work continued. The passion was the same. The man was the same. He was building a legacy, not of concrete and steel, but of purpose. And he was finally at peace. What a powerful journey of integrity and self-worth. Elias's story is a profound reminder that true value is not about the job title, the bank account, or the approval of others. It's about the character you build when no one is watching, and the quiet dignity you maintain in the face of disrespect. It teaches us that sometimes the most powerful move is not to fight back with anger, but to simply stand in your own truth and let the consequences unfold naturally. We have to ask, what do you think? Was Chloe's demotion a just consequence? Or do you believe she deserved a harsher or a more lenient outcome? Is there a path to true redemption for someone like her? We would love to read your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspectives make this community what it is. If this story resonated with you, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel for more dramas about justice, redemption, and the quiet strength of the human spirit. Thank you for being here with us today, and we can't wait to see you in the next one.